Welcome to the Medicinology podcast. I'm Imogen, an A-level student here to bring you the best people with knowledge and insight on how to get into med school, how to become a doctor, and to help you decide whether a career in medicine is for you. I'm here today with Raj Maan, who is a medical student at Newcastle Uni and has also been the president of the Academic Medicine Society and a part of the Surgical Society. So keep listening to hear more about those later. Welcome to the podcast, Raj. It's great to have you on here.
Hi. Thanks for having me on, honestly. I've seen like your whole LinkedIn post about the other podcast. It seems like a pretty good thing. I wish I had it when I was applying, if I'm perfectly honest. So
Yeah, that's great. It's great to have you on here. And so let's go right back to the very start. How did you decide that medicine was the right thing for you?
yeah, when you gave me the list of questions, I was like, damn, this is a big one right from the get-go. Um, well, I guess like if I had to say it, like this is gonna sound like a bit cliche, but growing up in a British Indian household, I kind of had two career options pre-chosen for me. It was either going to be doctor or engineer. I'm not gonna lie to you. But jokes aside, it isn't too far from the truth. Like I know a lot of people talk about their first experiences on their personal statements and stuff like that, and I was no different. And especially when it comes to interview, it's a question that keeps coming up, like, yo, why do you want to do medicine and stuff? And they talk about like the first time that they like interacted with a doctor, the first time they saw an emergency thing. But for me, it kind of comes down to like two main things. And they're gonna sound a little bit selfish, but ultimately, like I want to be honest with you guys, and for the sake of like transparency. So my first reason is basically my family work 12 hours a day. I'm not gonna lie, and they do that to support me. Obviously that's like going to take a toll on their body, and I personally can't remember like a week where they weren't aching or paining or complaining about other such issues. And for my mother, whenever she went to the doctor, she would take me with her as a de facto like translator, and I've been working that gig since I was like 6 years old. So I basically figured it out from repeat exposure. So yeah, I basically wanted to just be the person that made people better. And I think that's a fairly valid choice. Um, yeah. The second thing is more personal to me. It's more faith driven. So I've grown up in a fairly religious Sikh household, and with that comes a massive piece of moral guidance. And if I had to summarize our faith based on one thing, it's basically just help as much as you can. So if you now combine the two, you end up with the logical thing of okay, I'm going to do this. And since then, I've obviously like thrown my own personality into it. So I'm very surgically inclined, and I'm kind of just progressing down that route. And that's honestly, it wasn't like an instantaneous moment. It was just repeat exposure versus like inbuilt personality stuff. And I think honestly, that's kind of a fair explanation as to how I got into medicine, basically.
No, I think that's really great and really good honesty, actually. And I mean, I say it for my reasons for going into medicine in the future about how you can help people, and it's such a great career for that. And
Mm.
also, obviously, some careers help people, but I think being a doctor is a very special and unique way to do that. So yeah, I definitely see that. And if you've had that experience with your mum as well,
Oh
yes,
yeah, absolutely. And I think there's an adage in medicine, like when you get here, for everyone listening, that the specialty that you'll eventually decide is usually the first one that was nice to you. Whereas like it rings true with the whole career thing that the people that are nice to you is more likely to what you'll get drawn to. And for me, that was definitely a factor in medicine as well, though, like I said, leaning more towards surgery now.
yeah, that makes sense.
Mm.
Yeah, I get that. And so once you decided that medicine was the right thing for you, and as you said, there were kind of only two paths you could have taken.
Yeah.
But once you decided medicine's the one, how did you decide that in Newcastle, like what drew you to Newcastle as a med school?
Well, so way back when I'm 26 now, when I was 18 and applying to like unis and stuff like that, there was two things going through my mind once again. how do I get into med school was one of them. And then the other one was my dad telling me that I could only stay in the region, which is fair enough that like, parents are allowed to voice opinions and stuff like that. But like bear in mind, go wherever will take you. That is my honest advice to people. It took me 4 attempts to get into medicine, so I've done a bachelor's degree since then, a master's degree, and then I got into medicine. I was fairly committed that I was going to get in. And since the beginning, I'd been applying to Newcastle just because I'm from the region. Um, with specific mention to Newcastle, it was based around the structure of the course as well. So I really learn by contextualizing stuff. Like if I can picture it, if I can put it into a context that makes sense, then that's kind of the way forward for me. And Newcastle do this interesting case-based approach. So I'll get into more of it when we talk about like the actual course structure, but the way that they have like a context to what it is we're learning, it isn't just learning anatomy, physiology, biochem, and stuff like that that other unis might do. It's based around a sort of story, and then we link things back to that for about 2 to 3 weeks, and then we'll move to the next one, and bit by bit you start building into that puzzle of basically learning about the whole body. And yeah, that's that's basically what led me to Newcastle. It was quite a trek to get there, but in the end, I mean, we all get there.
Yeah, you got there in the end. And
Yeah.
with your, so you've done a bachelor's and a master's, you said.
Yep.
So do you think that doing those degrees beforehand has helped you with your medicine degree now?
I can tell you that it was an advantage and a disadvantage. So there are quite a few graduates on, like obviously Newcastle has its A101 course, which is the graduate entry, but it also has quite a few graduates applying to the undergrad program, and that is basically what I did. Um, it helped me in the sense that like I was more comfortable with how I'd been learning, but as we'll come to later, my learning style did not really mesh well with medicine right from the get-go. And that was like the main disadvantage that with stuff like bachelor's and masters, you go for what I call the funnel approach. So you start broad and you work your way into a hyper specialty. So for my masters in particular, I was looking at lung transplantation and I was like basically the master of my own element there. Does that apply to medicine as a whole? Probably not. So having niche knowledge about one particular area may not help you as much as you think, but the ability to like critically appraise and think about things and then understand research and how research impacts guidelines helped me a lot more than anything that I actually took away like content wise from both of those degrees.
Yeah, yeah, we've had a lot of people on the podcast who are graduates, and they've said how it's helped with research, essays, exams, the kind of more, things that come with any degree rather than specific to medicine, but also I guess the research and understanding the sort of sciences. So yeah, that's
Mm.
definitely something that comes up a lot. So you've said about there's a few disadvantages, but also you're close to home. So
Yep.
how have you found Newcastle?
Well, so I've been a part of the cohort that got sent home because of COVID. So I imagine that's like a common trend amongst your speakers so far. So I was in first year when COVID happened, and we got to January, and then they told us to go home. And so from January, my first year was kind of fragmented, as was my second year. Third year, great, love it. But overall, I'd say it's been a fairly like positive experience. There's been hiccups, which once again we'll get into later, but for the most part, it's great. The city's great. The people, for the most part, are also like really fun to be around. You'll find your people, and there's like the as a uni as a whole, there's the med school, and then there's the university basically. And in the Venn diagram, there is overlap in that. Like we're fairly separate from the rest of campus because we're built into Newcastle's RVI hospital, but the rest of campus is literally across the street, and then you can join societies and make friends with people on other courses and stuff like that. And honestly, it's just if I said it's just a vibe, then that's basically it. Like there's so much to do, so many like things to see in Newcastle. It's just a great place to be.
That's really good. Yeah, I really like that because I mean, you said how it's slightly separate to the rest of the campus, but you don't feel isolated because
Yeah.
I live near Exeter and Exeter Uni, they have the main campus and then a good 20, maybe more walk away is the other campus, as you
Hmm.
say, next to the hospital.
Yeah.
And so I feel like in that situation it would be quite easy to get isolated. But if you're
Hmm.
saying you can join societies, it's a vibe like that's
Yeah.
here.
Well, I mean, it's like we're not geographically separate. It's more like within the uni's own organization. So there's like the uni will oversee every other course, and obviously it's divided into their own schools and stuff. But the School of Medicine, for whatever reason, I think it's more to do with like historically it's being separate. But the School of Medicine just sort of does its own thing anyway. So we're built into the RVI. There's like student accom is right next door. So for anyone going to Newcastle, you can, and I didn't tell you this, but you can basically get up 5 minutes before your lectures and then just rock up because it is literally like this close away. So yeah, no, it's great. I highly recommend Newcastle.
Oh, that's handy. Just get out of bed straight in the lecture.
Basically,
That's nice and easy. That's what you want, really, isn't it? Especially if
truly, as long as you go to the lectures, that's the main thing.
yeah, that's true. It's always the people who live the closest that end up being the latest, isn't it?
Yeah.
They feel they can just jump out of bed. But so you mentioned a little bit about the course structure. So do you just want to go into that in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, so basically we're divided into two phases. There's the preclinical phase, which covers years 1 and 2, and then there's the clinical phase, which is 3 to 5. And basically within the first 2 years, we cover 25 of those cases I talked about earlier. And it'll be like case one will be about like heart and stuff. Case two will be about like the vasculature. Three will be about kidneys. And you can see how what I was talking about, the jigsaw effect. So I think in year one, it's more about the visceral organs, and then when you get to like second year, it's more about the entire arm, the entire leg, and stuff like that. Um, so we cover stuff like anatomy, physiology, pathophysiology, and stuff like that in the relevant context to a disease itself. So we'll do like cardio and be looking at heart attack and stuff like that. um Throughout that it isn't just like we're based in lectures, so we have a couple of interspersed clinical days where you go to a GP and you interview patients, and as well as that we go to hospitals and for like a day and see patients and stuff like that. As well as all of this, we're also taught how to do like procedures and examinations and like how to talk to patients, and that kind of makes up some of our assessment as well. So alongside the usual set of exams, we have like clinical exams in first and second year where we do exactly that. And they just kind of do it for the most part to double check that, you're a safe professional when it comes to doing it for real in third year. And it isn't like okay, you've passed this exam, you can just go wild with patients. When you get to third year, they'll double check, triple check, and they'll keep on doing it so that you never feel sort of uncomfortable with what you're doing. And if you are, you can just tell them and they'll like do something about it, and not in like a mean way. They'll probably just like organize an extra session for you to like ask questions and, get a little bit more out of it. For the most part, after that, clinical is everything else. You're assigned to what they call an LEP, and that's within 3 zones outside of Newcastle. So zone one is Newcastle itself, basically. Zone two takes you around to Durham, and then zone three goes as far as Carlisle and as far down as like Middlesbrough near York. And this just illustrates that Newcastle is a big medical school. So within those zones, you can be allocated any one of like specific hospitals that Newcastle works with, and that is where you spend the entire year for that year. So right now, I'm based in Middlesbrough. I'm at James Cook. It's a regional trauma center. Given my love of surgery, it's exactly where I want to be. And then the way Newcastle works is that you can get each zone once. So I've had my zone 3 now. Next year I'll be in Newcastle, which is my zone 1, and then I'll be in Northumbria, which is my zone 2. And that's basically how they work on allocations. They've changed it a lot from last year. It used to be completely random that you'd rank your choices and then whatever you got, and then you could try and find someone to swap with. But I think honestly, this situation kind of works better in that regards that, you get given one of each. You know exactly where you're going to go from third year all the way to fifth year, and you can plan ahead for that. Um, Alongside those hospital stuffs, you also get allocated a GP. So for me, my GPJs are every Tuesday. I'll go to GP, I'll see patients. We kind of run this parallel clinic sort of thing. So the doctor will be in one room seeing a patient. I'll be in the next room with a friend seeing another patient. We'll talk to them, we'll have a history. It isn't like usual GP 10 minutes per appointment. It's however long we basically need. Like we'll have patients booked, so as long as we work to that time limit, it's fine. And then we'll call the doctor back in and we'll be like, okay, this is this patient. They present with X, Y, and Z. This is what we think is happening, and we recommend this. And if we can justify it to the doctor, then usually they'll either agree or they'll disagree. They'll do their own examination, and then we'll send the patient away happy, hopefully. Um, I think for the most part, that's all of it about the content, but I would like to make special mention to what we call SSCs and electives. So I don't know if anyone has talked about electives in prior episodes.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit.
Okay. Well, Newcastle has some SSCs, so at the end of third year and currently at the end of fourth year, or sorry, at the end of fifth year, you get the option to do what they call a student selected component, where you pick a discipline and you go away and you do that for 4 weeks. So for us third years, it happens after exams. Last year I did neurosurgery, whereas this year I'm looking at going out of the region to London, maybe to St. Thomas's to look at a bit of vascular surgery, which is something that you can do as long as you can justify to the med school why it is you need to go out of the region. And then, like no doubt other people have said, the electives are like the peak med school life sort of thing. It usually happens after finals. You go uh, for about 8 weeks, I think, is in Newcastle, but you can have that as like a 4 week split between two different places. So I know a lot of people do 4 weeks here and then they'll go to a different country for 4 other weeks. And it's usually like Malaysia or stuff like that because we have another campus out there. And I think honestly that's basically Newcastle in a nutshell, if I'm perfectly honest.
No, there's so much there to talk about. Yeah, I've definitely heard a little bit about electives. I'm trying to remember where one of my guests has been. I want to say New Zealand, one of them's been to places like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear about
Honestly,
that,
yeah,
actually.
you can go anywhere. So I know people in the year above that have gone to Korea, New York, Malaysia, Vietnam, like literally as long as it's safe for you, the med school will usually be like, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, that makes sense because I think otherwise the uni's a bit kind of their fault, isn't it? So if
Yeah.
you don't want to do that, that makes sense. With clinical exams, so is that things like putting in a cannula, taking blood? What is that? What do
So
you do in your clinical exams?
it's hard to talk about it without like telling you what my prior exams will be. So I'll try to refrain from like spilling the beans on what the old exams were like. But they can basically be like, here's a patient. You'll be outside of a room. They'll be like, here's a patient. Here's what on this piece of paper it'll say like they are X years old. They have this complaint, please go in and do this. And it'll be like either an examination, so like a neurological examination, it could be a cardiovascular examination, anything. And yeah, you basically just do that, and you're assessed based on how well you do the examination, but also more of like how you put yourself across. So you could be totally robotic, hit everything, but if you don't have like a good patient rapport, then that is not gonna be well looked upon. Because I think the patients are then asked for their opinion after the fact. So if they don't take a shining to you, then it may work against you. So ruthless efficiency is never really the way forward. It's just more get yourself to war, practice as much as you can, and then you'll find your natural flow of doing things. They do get a little more complex as the years go on. So I know it's in first and second year, you'll basically just be asked to do it. In third year, you'll be asked to like report your findings back and comment on anything that might be abnormal. And then it works its way up to fourth year, which is what we call a Mosler, where you may be asked to examine, take a history, and then provide what you think is going on and a management plan. So there's quite, if I just told you it like that, then it would be like this huge scary thing. But the fact that it builds itself up over so many years is like just shows like how Newcastle is with building you up as a clinician as opposed to like just dropping you in the deep end.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And then you can grow your, I guess it's not just your knowledge, it's also people skills,
Yeah,
communication, empathy,
absolutely.
all of that kind of thing. Yeah, that makes sense. And also talking about you spoke about the different zones. I think that's quite a cool way because then no one ends up being really far away every
Yeah.
single time. That seems like a good solution. And you also mentioned about being at the trauma center this year.
Yep.
So with that, have you seen any gory stories? I like to ask this question a lot.
Well, it depends on what you mean by gory. So I've like had my hands inside people's abdomens like whilst I've been scrubbed in. Um, Coming in on weekends like gives you such an insight as to how the hospital usually is. Um, I've had really like so sorry, I'm just trying to find my words. Basically people usually have an instance in theater where they might get woozy, and for me, that's only ever happened once. And it was not anything massive. It was a simple, like, varicose vein removal thing, but it was done under local anesthetic, and they basically get a fishing hook after making a little incision, wrap it around the vein, and then yank it out. And that whilst the person was awake and I'm holding their leg down and I can see them because there's a thin divider and I'm just looking through like, yeah, it's all going fine and I'm just getting like dizzy and I'll say it like to anyone listening interested in theater or surgery, if you get dizzy, just step away because no one ever wants to be like the one med student that face plants into like the open abdomen, which is a joke that keeps coming up, but I don't know if it's actually ever happened. I've heard of people fainting and like passing out on the floor, but I don't think anyone's ever fallen forward, which is a good thing. Outside of that, like I said, I've had my hands in like people's abdomen whilst we've done like bowel stuff. I've been a part of like cardiothoracic stuff and like sawing open the chest is fairly like brutal to watch too. And yeah, I don't think I've come across anything like majorly gory. It's just been more time consuming than anything else. But I will say one of the coolest things I've ever seen was during my neurosurgery placement last year because when you've got like a tumor or what we call a space occupying lesion in the brain, one of the things you could do is obviously just remove it. But to do that, you can either drill a burr hole and like decompress, or you can cut a circle out of basically the skull, take it away, and then I'm struggling for words other than dig around inside looking for it. It's a lot more precise. The setup for the surgery takes about 3 hours, but I had the rare opportunity of seeing an awake surgery, which was pretty interesting given the whole brain thing. We had to put him back to sleep because it did take a turn, but it was just interesting because he had like a carer holding his hands like during it, being like, "We're all here for you. We're safe. Everything's going okay." And it was just like constant reassurance, but I'd never seen that before. And then, yeah, like I said, we had to re-sedate him just because it wasn't going as well as we'd hope it to.
Yeah. Oh gosh, a lot of those they definitely qualify for the gory story list. But everyone says this. They say, "Oh, we're desensitized," or like it's not that gory. But if you're not in medicine, having your hands in someone's abdomen is, yeah, that's pretty
Honestly, I think
high
the
on the
the
list.
the main thing for me was that I didn't know what I expected because it was my first time being in abdomen surgery. They cut it open, and then the consultant just took the intestines out and put it like on the field. And I was like, I've never actually thought about how they go around. I thought they just kept it inside, but no, it was just like take it all out and then just like watch it just slop there on top of the patient's stomach for a bit. And I was like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably not that many things you can do it with, like the brain. You probably
Yeah.
pull
Probably
it
just
out.
not rip it out and put it to one side.
No, but
Um,
yeah, open. So it was open brain surgery while
open,
the
open,
patient was awake.
open, yeah, open brain surgery whilst the patient was awake. And I think outside of that, see, I don't really gauge things based on gory factor. I gauge them more based on how much I did. So like, there's a lot of surgery-based things where you just go in and observe. Whereas sometimes if the consultant is feeling nice, there's not too many people, and the um well, Mercury is in retrograde, then hopefully they you might just get to scrub in and help out. So for me, it was the consultant and the reg had to go do something, and it was a spinal decompression surgery, and the reg left, the consultant was there, and he looks at me and is like, "Have you ever scrubbed in before?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Okay, double glove and meet me at the table." And I thought I was just going to be watching really close, but I was just being his assistant for what felt like an eternity, and I was like, this is interesting because I didn't think I'd be qualified to go up to the actual table, but I mean, under the direct supervision of a consultant surgeon, then everything is like okay, so long as the patient's consented to it first, which I do believe they had.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. You've got
Yeah.
to be safe. But do things like that, experiences like that, do they really kind of spark your interest in surgery?
Oh, absolutely. I'm a lot more focused on like the practical aspects. Like I'm big into the whole like instant gratification of surgery versus like the whole like clinical puzzle making of medicine. So like that's I think will crop up later on in the discussion. But for me, it's just I'm good with working with my hands and doing like a surgery, knowing what a root cause may be, and then going in and resolving it as best as I can is basically what I've decided is for me going forward.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And speaking of surgery, actually, you are a part of the Surgical Society. So obviously, you're considering going into that potentially. And so, how has the society helped you with that?
Well, basically, so there's a moment in med school where you'll basically stand on the medicine versus surgery line. For a lot of people, it's like a what do you call it? Like a definitive like core memory sort of moment. Um where you know exactly when it was, where you were, and it's like what it was that triggered you one way or the other. So basically for a lot of people it's like when they go into theater for the first time, they'll either know that surgery is pretty cool and for them, or they'll know that it's probably not. And but for a lot of other people, it's like a slow progression of like, okay, this medicine isn't like for me. I prefer to take it broad, so figuring out whether surgery was for me or medicine. And then when I found out surgery was for me, I started exploring like other specialties. And to do that as a clinical year, I found that SurgSoc was a big benefactor in doing that. So I applied to be part of the committee, and I knew I wanted to explore more, so I became their talks officer, and I would put on like a monthly talk based around like specialties. So the first one was like cardiothoracics, urology, neurosurgery, and I had consultants come in with their regs and talk about it, the application process, like what a day in the life is like. And from that, for everyone that it came and myself, I started to narrow it down to what I wanted to do. And yeah, so that was a big help in like helping me like figure out what I want to do with like my future. But then I started taking it like a step forward. So when it came time to reapply for committee, I volunteered myself for a skills officer. So right now I run a surgical skills course for the medical students that takes place in South Tees, so where I am right now, as part of like a way to get those furthest away from Newcastle involved, as well as in the medical school itself. And we go through stuff like suturing, how to like wound a bride, how to actually scrub in as well, because that is a really important skill that you need to master if you want to like pursue surgery and stuff. And for the next stage, which will begin in January, I'm going to be running like simulations based around three specialties. So there'll be trauma and orthopedics, so like all that bone stuff and fun stuff like that, general surgery, and then vascular surgery. So we take it from like the big macro down to the really small like microsurgery skills, and we'll round it off with a contest. And I hope that that will develop people's surgical skills as well as my own, because I'll also be um doing it alongside these students as it's running. But it's been decent for like what it is, because the response for it has been absolutely astounding, because obviously everyone loves a bit of practical skills, especially when your entire day is marked with lectures and seminars and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. And it's really good because you're helping them and yourself develop the surgical skills, as you said.
Yeah.
And it's also
Honestly, like with medicine, I think everything sort of becomes an efficiency game. Like how much can you do and how many birds can you kill with like the proverbial one stone. So if I can do something that hits like, oh, I've started teaching other people things and learning some things alongside that, then that's honestly the best use of your time.
yeah, and teaching, we've said it before, is such a good
Yeah,
way to learn and to revisit those things, but also it's leadership skills, organization,
absolutely.
getting these events together. So yeah, killing a lot of birds with one with one stone, ticking all these skill boxes is really, really good.
Basically.
Yeah, and you've also been the president of the medical society. So as you said about efficiency and doing lots of
Yeah.
things at once. So what was your role within that?
So with Academic Medicine Society, we focus a lot more on research, and given my background with like the whole masters in research and bachelor's, that was kind of like a passion from my own part. I really applied for the position, and like I said, I'm gonna try to be as honest as I can because of COVID once again. So an unintended side effect for societies during COVID was that some societies thrived when everything went digital, and others did not do as well. And I do regret to say that Academic Medicine Society was one of the ones that didn't handle that transition perfectly well. So research is like a big part of being a medical student, or a clinician in general, but you can start to get involved with it like whilst you're a student. And basically, when you come to apply for like specialty training posts, which is a lot later on than I appreciate you may be thinking, because like I get that right now it's like get into medical school, but then when you're in medical school, the next step is like, okay, what do I need to do next? Which is where you start thinking about what you want your career to look like. So I've got a big folder like right on that shelf up there that has like all the checklists where you go through like everything you need to like join core surgical training. And a little bit of it is like engagement with research. So a lot of students go hunting for research opportunities, but can scarcely find them because they don't know what to do. They don't know how to get involved with research or what skills they need. And honestly, for a lot of the time, they don't know how to ask. So mirroring what I was doing with SurgSoc and teaching people skills, I decided that the best thing to do was to take it down to basics again, have a society dedicated to one thing and one thing only, which is teaching people from zero to about 75, not the full 100, but 75, about what research involves, what it is, why it's important for them, as well as how they can get involved with it, what skills they need, teaching them those same skills. And yeah, it's been quite a resounding success so far, touch wood. But we've got bigger plans for the next coming year. But basically, like I said, to answer your question, COVID happened, and then I think I got a DM to the society like page on Instagram, and someone was like, "Hi, are you running any events?" And I had a conversation with them, and they just asked me straight, "Why didn't you apply for presidency?" And I was like, "You know what? Why don't I?" And that's like one of the tips I'll mention later on. Like at some point, you just kind of have to become a yes person, saying yes to opportunities that present themselves to you. And that's basically where I've taken it from there. I've got an excellent committee of like 9 people helping me out with that. We've recently secured some funding to fund student research projects over the summer as well. And hopefully we can get this thing going again to, make some sort of like regional research collaborative where clinicians approach us to give research projects to students and students can approach us to like get matched to people around the region, taking that whole finding people out of the entire equation itself. And alongside that, it kind of just offers a level of protection to students because this may be slightly off topic, but there are some people in academia that may just, I don't want to say use you, but utilize your freer time and then offer you not much. So we kind of want to iron that out with the clinicians themselves. So I'm working on like a performer right now that they can fill in where it's like, this is the title of their project. This is what they're going to have to do, and this is what the student is going to get out of it. Because if we have it written down, then it's not like they can, go back on their words, so to speak. Because I know personally, I was part of an AI project that went through 8,000 patients. Yeah, and then I got ghosted by the clinician that was doing it. So I'm not entirely sure where my time and effort went for that, but I don't want that to happen to any other students. So obviously the society will exist to protect people from that happening as well.
Well, that's really great that you've got, I mean, a fairly big committee and you just went for it. And obviously research is really important, and connecting the students with the people facilitating the research is really good. And then it's kind of, it makes the process a bit easier for
Mm.
the students, I think, if you kind of bridge the gap. That's
Well, I said it like during one of our opening lectures. Like, I just asked the crowd, I was like, why is research important? And they gave some really good answers based around like, oh, it guides clinical decision making. It'll help us with portfolios. But ultimately, I think the main advantage you get from like intercalating or yeah, yeah. So intercalation is basically where you elect to do a degree within your degree. So I think it's between fourth and fifth year. You can elect to take a year out at Newcastle and do a master's. It used to count towards points for like future specialty training. It no longer does. However, that being said, I would absolutely advocate for it if you have a genuine interest within that specific field. So people did like MRESs in surgical anatomy and cancer genomics and stuff like that. And it's really cool if you have an interest, but if you're doing it for points, then it's not that useful for you anymore. But I think the one key thing that you can take away from like getting involved with research and the one key thing that will benefit you from going forward is the ability to like critically appraise something, because that is like a unique skill that surprisingly many people haven't trained. I won't say they don't have it, it's just not been like developed as well as it could be. So if you get on that earlier, you become a fairly rare commodity when it comes to you know, interacting with consultants and stuff like that. So for me, it's a lot of my hobbies are based around like self-development stuff. So I'm learning how to code, I'm learning how to 3D print, and it's already helped me out a bit because when consultants have been like, "Oh, I have an idea for a project," I've been like, oh yeah, I can do that. And that's kind of like an attitude you need to have going forward is like it goes back to the efficiency thing of like what can I do to like make sure I have a adequate skill set that makes me something other than just a medic.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. We've spoken about this so much on the podcast about not making medicine the sole purpose of what
Yeah.
everything you do. So yeah, it's really important, really, really important to do that. And also you said about having to only do it if you have a genuine interest in it with
Yeah.
integration. Yeah, I think that's really important. Because if you're just doing it, as you say, you don't get the points anymore. But if you're just doing it to say, oh, I did this as well, then it's a whole nother year. Like it's quite
Yeah.
a lot of time, isn't it? So
Honestly, the years will come anyway, so like it doesn't really even matter about the whole year thing. It's just like you will not engage. I don't think you will engage with it as well as you can if you don't have an interest in it. So like a lot of doing the MRes is like your own intuition and stuff like that. And I think there's been a lot of fun times I've had like in the lab whilst working on like lungs where I've been like, oh, this can help, and I sprint off to like the other side of the lab to go and get something and bring it back. If you're not engaged with it, like I don't think those moments really come for you because you'll turn up like basically do the bare minimum and go home. Whereas like, engaging with something, if your work is fun, then it's no longer work, basically.
yeah, that's so true. I love that quote. I'm gonna have that on a little quote card now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really important. And so you've spoken about how you've applied to medicine quite a few times, had to do other degrees beforehand and kind of
Hmm.
other reasons why you went into medicine. But what have been the main barriers on your medical journey and how did you overcome them?
Honestly, if I'm like perfectly transparent with you, I think it's mental health and self-belief seem to be the reappearing barriers for me. So with like, I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, or we may have been talking about it before we started recording, but I'm currently redoing my third year, and that was because, like I said, COVID's hit first year and wiped out half of my first year. It was a big presence during second year, and in third year, when it came time to make the leap to clinical learning, I just wasn't ready, if I'm perfectly honest. I was tired. I had made medicine my entire life and nothing else. I wasn't really looking after myself as much as I could be. And it's a very easy trap, no matter how like old you are, how mature you are, to fall into. And it's just one of those things that you'll see all of these other bright and intelligent individuals around you, and you'll start developing that famous med student imposter syndrome, where you're like, do I belong here? Or you'll start doubting things that you know about yourself, and it's not a great place to be in. But I think the key thing with that is like knowing when to like seek help and stuff like that. So like pastoral care in Newcastle is fairly good when you get to clinical years, and I was very fortunate to have the people at my base unit last year looking out for me as well as they did, because when it came time to sit the exams, they could see that I just wasn't ready for it, and they put measures in place to mean that I had a little extra time to prepare. And then in the end, I just decided to do the year again because ultimately it's just a case of error gets carried forward. And I really needed to spend some time just like fixing these like improper like thought processes where it's like I get uncharacteristically hung up over medicine and nothing else. So right now I've started like, going to the gym more regularly, eating like not takeaway every night, which is a very slippery slope to fall into whilst in medical school and stuff like that. But there's a lot of internal barriers as well. So in medical school, I don't know if anyone's covered it yet, but you get ranked. Has anyone mentioned this?
No, I haven't heard of that before.
All right, so basically, in Newcastle, when you sit an exam, you get told where you came in the year, and that is to some mortifying because there's this really interesting thing. It's basically like a bell-shaped curve where a vast majority will stay right in the middle, and you can get like 5 more marks than someone, and just because of the sheer volume of people go up 50 ranks.
Yeah.
And it's not, for some people, they make it their entire personality trait. And I mean, like, they'll try everything to like find out what other people's ranks are, put their rank out there. But for me, it was just not that big of a deal. And if I'm perfectly honest, objectively, it is never that big of a deal. I'm not entirely sure why we still do it. But like, if I go to my exam score, it will tell you where you came in the year every year. And it's just not a great thing, and it sort of adds to that whole thing of like the mental health and self-belief thing, because then you have what I'd consider it's not an objective marker, because there's you are so much more than your ranking, as well as like so much more in medicine in and of itself. But it's really easy to like fall into this whole like trap, like I said, of neglecting everything for medicine. My main advice to people with that is consider first year to be like your development year. This isn't like technically your start. Play around with like how to revise, uh, engage with the content, but also like don't learn for the sake of like exam, learn for the sake of learning. It goes back to what I was saying, is that if your work is fun, it will never be work. Yeah, and it's basically your time to play. So like some people like to go with Anki. I personally do it all the time, but sometimes when you see 1,000 flashcards are left in the day, you don't want to do them, and I can see why that would make it a barrier for other people. I'm currently playing around with mind maps right now because that's a better way to make like um basically lateral links when it comes to other concepts and topics as well. So I found that last year, even though my revision was like going okay and I was doing like my Anki all of the time, I wasn't linking between concepts well at all. My lateral thinking skills were just off the table, and that's not really something anyone tells you about. It kind of comes with a degree of like reflection of like, oh, other people are like making links between topics more easily than I am. I wonder why. And then it's just like, sitting down and figuring out what works for you. Because in first year, it's still simple enough that, you've got an affordability that you can play so long as like the whole ranking thing isn't on your mind. So with that, it's basically, like what I was saying, that ranking doesn't matter, honestly. If you want to use it as motivation, feel free, but motivation is fleeting. You're better off developing a very core set of skills that will help you become a more hardy individual to the stressors of med school. Because med school, if I'm perfectly honest, turns everything on its head. The things that I was doing in my master's in biomed did not work for me when it came time to start medicine. And then with that, I always felt like I was playing catch up. But I think that is just a firm thing of medical school in and of itself, that you will always be behind. It's just a fact of life because there's just so much to do.
Yeah, I've never heard of that ranking thing before. That is quite horrible, to be fair. And but if you're saying if you only get 5 marks different, your rank changes so much, then it
Hmm. It's
isn't.
just no one ever tells you that either. It's something that you kind of just observe. Like you'll be talking to your friend and they'll be like, "Oh, I got 72%," and you'll be like, "Oh, I got 70." And the ranking difference will be like 50 places, and I'm like, "Why is it like this?"
Yeah, that's crazy. I don't know if I like the sound of that, but I mean, yeah, as you say, it could be used for motivation. That's always,
Hmm.
I guess, a reason why they would do it. But at the same time, if it could be used for motivation, but at the
Hmm.
same time, you could just become so.
There is a practical aspect to it. I think the top 10% of people in med school year get honors for that year.
Okay, yeah,
But that, once again, doesn't mean anything really. Like when you get to specialty, like no one later on in your career is going to ask if you got honors at med school. It's just not a done thing, and like I've had so many people tell me this, but like I said, some people in med school make it their entire personality. It's just a case of like figuring out what it is you want, and then sort of aligning yourself with that and blocking out any talk of ranking or taking it in if you so choose.
Well, I mean, if you all pass the test and all do well, then
Exactly, that's
it,
all that matters.
yeah, I've heard this on another podcast actually, that half the people that pass their test were in the bottom half of the class. And saying that out loud sounds weird, but there's gonna be a bottom half, and
Yeah.
if you pass, that's all that really matters. As long as you know it and you're safe, then
Hmm.
you know,
Honestly, as long as you get over the line, that's the main thing. Because like, there's too much to do to like compromise your health for anything else.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And obviously, you've been part of a lot of societies, and that probably has helped being part of a team and having other goals outside of medicine. Because you said you did kind of get a bit too overly just
Yeah.
medicine, just the content. So being part of societies probably has helped with that, I'm guessing.
Oh, absolutely. It's
Yeah,
like I said, it even if it just gives you some people to talk to, like in regards to your stress, because like when you realize that other people are also feeling as stressed as you are with everything that's going on, you realize that you aren't just sort of in this alone, that there's like, oh, this is just how med school is, basically. It's hard. It's worth it, I hope. I'll tell you when I get to the end. But it is just something that you have to get through, perfectly honestly.
yeah, yeah. And so to finish off, what would you say are your top three tips to get stuck in and participate within these sort of societies?
Okay. Um, well, I saw this like when you sent me the questions, so I was like, this is actually interesting because I've given out quite a bit of advice in the same regards, like just generally when people in the lower years come to talk to me after like society events. I think my first one would just be the phrase "you're only an idiot once." And I don't know, do you kind of get the meaning behind that?
Yeah, yeah, I think
Okay.
that.
So like everyone gets hung up on asking questions because they don't want to be stupid. I am absolutely guilty of doing this last year. I don't think I said a single word in class until the end of last year. And someone just came up to me afterwards and were like, it's very apparent that you don't want to like anyone to think negatively of you, and that's why you're not talking because you don't want to be wrong. But you only really learn when, you engage with the thing, and that's kind of like the whole meaning behind the "you're only an idiot once" sort of statement. You can ask, be an idiot once, everyone in the room is probably thinking the same question you were like about to ask. So really, that just makes you brave, if I'm perfectly honest. And then you've taken away knowledge. That means you're never going to ask that question again. But if you don't and you say nothing, then you don't take any steps forward. It goes back to what they say that growth happens at the edge of your comfort zone. You kind of have to just keep pushing that boundary as much as you can. And I think that's like my number one biggest piece of advice. Just continuously ask questions and stuff like that. My second bit of advice is if you ask for nothing, you get nothing. So you have to sort of become a yes person, which is what I was saying before. If opportunity presents itself to you and you just turn it down, then, it's just kind of like a non-thing. But I've had the best experiences of my life from the opportunities I've said yes to. So when people have asked me to be like president of a society, or when people have like inquired what research projects I'm on, and I tell them, and they come back 2 weeks later with like, "Oh, we've got this new project. Would you like to do this?" And I'm like, "Absolutely, I would." But in Congress to what I was just saying, my third piece of advice is don't overburden yourself. So yeah, become a yes person, but within reason. Know your limitations, because I think it can really just be summarized by the question, would you rather do one or two things really well, or would you do 50 things to a poor standard? So like last year, I think, or not last year, but like in my second year, I was signing up to every like society and committee left and right and being pulled in like six different directions. But I wasn't really performing well in any of them. But whereas it comes to now, I've decided that SurgeSoc, an academic medicine society, are my only two like societies that I will dedicate most of my time to, that means that I can allocate hours of the week to them specifically and not have to burden myself with anything else. And then it's just those opportunities beget more opportunities. So then I can add in little bits when it's quiet with the societies, or I can take bits away when those things start picking up, and I can delegate to my committees when I need help and stuff like that. So yeah, you're an idiot once, but only once. If you ask for nothing, you get nothing, but also don't overburden yourself because, like, you at the end of the day, to be a surgeon or be a clinician or be an academic, you kind of need to graduate first. So your first priority should always be studying for like exams and stuff. And that's like, I mean that in like the whole like approach to med school. So like absolutely have extracurriculars so that you're not, like I said, you don't fall into that trap of, oh, I'm just a medical student, but don't stretch yourself so thin that it introduces like weaknesses in your armor, so to speak. Like you don't want that because it just means that if a big stressor comes around, you won't be able to like bounce back as effectively, and then that'll lead to more stress, and then things will just spiral.
I think that's really great advice. I really like those. You're only an idiot once. I think I have that a little bit where I don't put my hand up because I don't want to get it wrong. And yeah, I definitely have that at college. It's something that people just need to kind of get over. And once you've done it once, that it's fine. And yeah, that's definitely a really good point to make. And then also being a yes person. Yeah, that's the only way you get opportunities really. You
Honestly, yeah.
go for it. Honest, I a really good piece of advice there. And obviously don't overburden yourself. I think that's quite a hard one, but also you said about kind of focus on your studies, and I have found that a little bit because obviously with the podcast and other extracurriculars and kind of trying to build your personal statement, but then you think they won't even look at my personal statement if I don't have the right grades.
If
So,
I'm perfectly honest, I don't think Newcastle looks at your personal statement at all. So for anyone listening, like it's from my understanding, UK Cat or UCAT interview. As long as you can nail those things and get the grades to get in, that is key. So like I can only really uh, like attest to med school right now because I think I did my A levels almost a decade ago. But yeah, I mean I've had like times in a hospital recently where I've had to like say no to consultants asking if I wanted to go see a particular surgery because I know that I should be revising instead. And like ultimately, what's going to benefit me more? Is it going to do 3 hours worth of like practice questions on the internet, or is it going to be 3 hours of standing next to a table asking the occasional question every 15 minutes?
yeah, it is true. It's interesting about Newcastle not looking at the personal statement because I know Exeter don't and I know Bristol don't.
Yeah, I
And
was gonna say, did I give the game away with that?
no, it's good to know. It's good to know
Mm,
because if people like myself, I do want to build a good personal statement, but if the
mm.
university doesn't even look at it, it's like
So my knowledge on the matter is it may be a bit out of date, but like about the admissions policy, I can say this from when I was applying in 2015, it was a case of apply, score on the UK CAT, then go to interview, and at that stage, the thing that decides if you get an offer is just your interview score. And then that's basically it. So you can it's basically like a barrier approach system. If you are over the UK CATS threshold, you get an interview. If you're over the interview threshold, you get an offer. If you meet your offer, then you've got your place. Nothing is looked at twice, and I don't think the personal statement factors into it. If I'm perfectly honest, I think in my year, seven, is my math right? Seven? No. A couple of years ago, my first question, they give you a warm up and it's why medicine? And that in and of itself just says, because that one isn't assessed. That's just like the icebreaker question.
mm,
Like they're very keen on getting you to elicit your own personality but they're not going to do it in like the cliche way of asking you why medicine and stuff like that. They're just straight to the point. It's very efficient.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. And obviously, you can bring up all the other things you've done with your that you would put in a personal statement. You could bring them up in an interview, so it's not all lost. Obviously, you're gaining experience.
Honestly, I would say that it serves as a pretty good draft for your what you should talk about in your interview.
Yeah,
So treat it seriously, obviously, but it's not scored, I don't think.
yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for that amazing advice, and thank you for being here on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
That's all today from the Medisynergy podcast. Thank you for listening. Join us next week and make sure to recommend this episode to any aspiring medics.